Welcome to 20% Time, a podcast from the team at Titan, a web development consultancy that specializes in Laravel, Vue, React, sometimes Livewire, and a whole lot more. My name is Dave Hicking, and I'm here with my amazing co-host, Susanna. Susanna, how are you doing today?
I'm all right. How are you doing, Dave?
I'm doing wonderful. It is a Friday afternoon, which is typical for 20% Time. If this is your first time listening, we call it that because that's the day that Titan devotes to open source work, learning new things, trying to give back to the community, trying to, do interesting stuff. And that's kind of why we're here today. We're joined today by the one and only Tony Messias, who is a staff programmer at Titan. Tony, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Tony, I've been trying to get you on the show for a long time. Tony, for those of you who don't know, first of all, Tony's incredible. Tony, for folks who don't know you, where can they find you online?
Mostly on Twitter.
Okay.
My handle is TonySMDev, I think.
We can put a link in the show notes so people can see it. But yeah, no, Tony is a wonderful programmer. He is a wonderful teacher and learner as well. But he also, we were talking about giving back to the open source community. Tony has some interesting open source stuff that he has been working on. And that's why we have Tony on the show today is... we're going to talk to him about Turbo Laravel, which is super interesting. I feel like enough people aren't talking about it. That's why we wanted to have Tony on the show today. But before we do that, Tony, I want to start with an icebreaker question since this is your first time on the show. And, obviously we all know each other here, but let's just get it started with this. What is the most interesting thing you've worked on or done recently? Doesn't have to be at Titan, could be anywhere. Like, just what's the most interesting thing you've done recently?
Way to put him on a spot, Dave.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I was totally unprepared for this. So I have to say the import map stuff. So I have other packages besides Turbo Laravel, and I've been spending some time with them lately. And the import map Laravel package, that's very interesting work. So I'm go with that.
No, what is, and so for those who don't know, what does the import map package do?
Yeah, so
this just became a different podcast, apparently.
Yeah. So the idea of the package is it's a replacement for Webpack and Vite and all the JavaScript bundling. So you don't need any of that. You can write JavaScript and ship that same JavaScript that you wrote directly to the browser, and using ECMAScript's modules to import stuff, and then you can configure where these modules come from, and that's the idea. So you don't need Node to run PHP applications using modern JavaScript stuff. So,
interesting.
Tony, we might need to have you back to talk about that. We might need a Titan talk or something about that. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So Turbo Laravel. I'm going to make sure. Hopefully, I got this right. I'm the least technical person on this podcast today, so y'all please keep me honest.
Oh, no, you're not.
Turbo Laravel is a package, as I understand it, that lets devs get the most out of Hotwire, right? Which is this open source tool that Basecamp built, and Turbo Laravel itself is kind of inspired by a Ruby gem, and this is parts of it are kind of an evolution of TurboLinks, right?
Yeah.
So that's a lot to kind of unpack. So let's start with Hotwire. For someone who doesn't know what Hotwire is, what is it? And this is my favorite phrase at Titan. What problem is it trying to solve? What's the reason to use Hotwire?
Okay. So Hotwire is not actually a tool. It's not something that you can use. Hotwire it's more like an umbrella term for an approach to building multi-platform applications driven by a web application.
Okay.
It's a combination of some tools and libraries and techniques that allows you to build a web app and also port that web app to other platforms like mobile apps and desktop applications and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the pitch for it, I guess.
That's the big umbrella pitch for Hotwire, at least.
Yeah. Maybe it's easier if you compare that with something else, right?
Well,
go ahead.
No, I was going to ask, so what is it about Hotwire that made you want to? So I assume you worked with it. So what is it about that made it interesting for you?
Yeah, I think this multi-platform aspect of building an application and serving that to different clients that's when it all got my attention, actually, because as Dave mentioned on his question, like Hotwire is an evolution of Turbolinks, right? I've known Turbolinks for a while, and to me, it always sounded like something that would create more problems than it would solve. Because basically what Turbolinks did was you get a server-side application, traditional server-side application, no JavaScript navigation or anything like that. Every time you click on a link to your application, the default behavior of the browser is like send a request to the server and get the response and do a full page refresh, right?
Yeah.
What Turbolinks did was it hijacked your links, hence Turbolinks, and turned that into an AJAX request and sent that to the server via JavaScript and got the response and just replaced the body. That's the whole idea of Turbolinks. Turbo, which is one of the tools in the Hotwire umbrella, is basically an evolution of that. So this idea of building multi-platforms applications driven by web app, it's really what made me interested in Hotwire. And one thing I want to say is like Turbolinks didn't actually click for me until I watched Sam Stephenson's talk about, I think the talk is on YouTube. It's called Turbolinks. I can't believe it's not native. And it's that thing sold me to Turbolinks and stuff. So I started studying Turbolinks at that time. There was no Hotwire when I started studying it. And when Hotwire came live, I felt like I was like it was an evolution of the things that I was already studying. So I felt right at home.
So what happened to Turbolinks then? You said that Turbo is evolution of them. So I think they're no longer, or the package is no longer maintained. Is that right?
Yeah, well, the idea is Turbo kind of replaces Turbolinks. So it works pretty much the same way, but does a few different a few more things than Turbolinks used to do. So it's like it's a replacement pretty much. The old one still works, but if you want the new stuff, you gotta switch to Turbo.js.
Okay.
So this is kind of a side note before we get into more. So one thing that I know from working with you and following you on Twitter, which everybody should do, as we already mentioned, because you're super interesting on Twitter, is that you keep your eye on what's happening elsewhere in programming, obviously, right? Like, because a lot of these tools that you're talking about, I know you especially keep your eye on sort of the Ruby world and what's happening over there to see what's happening, to see, frankly, if there's anything that the Laravel world could make use of. Is that like something that you have always done as a dev? And I guess the sort of follow-up question is, do you kind of wish more folks were doing that too, to bring over interesting things from other platforms?
It's definitely something that I've always been doing. But to be honest, I don't know if anyone should do the same thing or not. Like,
because it's your thing.
It's something.
Just kidding.
Yeah, I don't know. It's something that I do because I enjoy.
Yeah.
So people might enjoy different things.
Well,
so I was going to ask. So because you keep an eye on the Ruby world, does it mean would you call yourself a Ruby developer as well, or is it?
That's interesting. I know enough Ruby and Rails to be dangerous. That's how I say it. But I haven't actually written any Rails program for production or anything like that for a client. I've only done pet projects, and I can run and debug Rails applications and Ruby gems and stuff like that. But my knowledge there is actually kind of limited. I have the same thing with Elixir and Phoenix because I keep an eye on that as well, and some other communities. So it's like I can understand some of the things that's happening there. And I try to bring some of the good stuff that I spot to the Laravel world, basically.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I mean, like, if other sort of communities are, we're all trying to solve similar problems, right? Yeah. And so if other communities are coming up with cool ideas, why not? Like, why reinvent the wheel? Like, you know what I mean? Like, why struggle? Because I'm sure that there are, Laravel is wonderful. We use it every freaking day here at Titan all the time. But there are always ways that it's growing and getting better. And I'm sure there are times where you're like, I kind of wish I want to do this thing. I want to pull this thing. I want this sort of pattern, or I want this feature. And it's like, well, they've got it. How do we get it? Right. I'm sure that's part of it.
Yeah, that actually happened a lot. Like I was giving an internal presentation at Titan.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the lines that I had was, I built Turbo Laravel because I wanted to use it. And it was cool to see that happening in Rails. So I wanted to use it. So I wrote it in PHP and Laravel. So.
Just why not? I mean, it's cool. Let's do it. Do you think your knowledge of Ruby was important for you to be able to build it in Laravel, or would it be possible for you to just know about a feature and then kind of make it up as you go along?
That's interesting. I haven't thought about that. When I first wrote the lib, so by the way, let's go back to when they released it, right? So it was 2020 or something, I think, somewhere around that. And it was right on the week of Christmas. I'm not sure if it was on Christmas Day or the day before that. And on the next day, I had a proof of concept for the library already. And
why not?
Yeah. And I only tried to reproduce what I saw from DHH's video where he was demoing Hotwire and stuff. But I actually rewrote this lib 2 or 3 times before the first release of it, because when I started reading the source code for the Turbo Rails gem, I noticed some things that they were doing were different than what I had. So I wanted to keep that in parity as much as I could. And it's a bit fun for me. Like I try to mimic the same code in PHP and Ruby. So if you open one of my libs, most of them are ports of Rails gems.
Yeah.
So if you open one of my libs and go to a random class, chances are that this class actually exists in the Ruby gem, and it's probably named the same. And there are the same methods with the same naming and signature.
It's really good because then you don't have to worry about naming things. You don't have to worry about the names. You just take what they did.
Yeah, it's also challenging because some of the stuff that exists in Ruby, the language, doesn't exist in PHP. So it's like, okay, now I have to work around this or something.
Okay, so Turbo Laravel supports, I want to make sure, so Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's like 4 aspects. There's Turbo Drive, Turbo Frames, Turbo Streams, and Turbo Native. Is that all right?
Yeah. Before we
go ahead.
Talk about this,
sure.
Maybe it's easy to talk about Hotwire is an umbrella term for this approach.
Yep.
And under the Hotwire umbrella, we have Turbo.js and we have Stimulus.js, which is front-end framework.
Yep.
And we have Strada, which is a library it's going to bridge the mobile and web world a little bit. It's going to make that work easier, but we don't know much about it because it wasn't released yet.
Okay.
Yeah, we only know what folks talk about on Twitter and on GitHub issues and stuff like that. So it's like very little. And these things that you mentioned, they are under the Turbo lib.
Right.
So in Turbo, we have Turbo Drive, which is the successor of TurboLinks. It's the direct successor of that. It does pretty much what TurboLinks did, but remember that I mentioned that TurboLinks only worked with links.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Therefore, the name was TurboLinks. Turbo Drive actually works with forms as well. So that's why it would be weird for them to call TurboLinks since it works with both forms and links. And yeah.
Okay.
So Turbo Drive, once you install Turbo.js on your application, Turbo Drive hijacks, it's like once that Turbo process starts in the browser, it will hijack any links and form submissions and will turn that into AJAX requests and do the full body replacement instead of a page refresh entirely. And that on its own, that gives you some performance, I should say perceived performance, but because there is no actual performance on the server benefit from this, but the users feel the application faster because all of a sudden you don't have to download the assets again. You don't have to repaint the page again. It just swaps the body and merges the head. That's the idea.
Yeah.
So they feel the application faster, even though it's actually the same speed over the wire. So you get that out of the box when you install Turbo, and that's okay. That gets you like maybe 60% like benefits.
Right.
Let's put it like that. But very soon you get into a situation where you want to replace just a small portion of the page, not the entire body.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Turbo frames come in. So
makes sense.
When you install Turbo, you get 2 new custom HTML tags to enhance your HTML, basically. And one of them is Turbo frames. The other one is Turbo streams, which we're going to talk. With Turbo frames, you can essentially wrap a portion of your page around the Turbo frame tag. And whenever there is a link click or a form submission inside that Turbo frame, Turbo will do the same thing, convert that to an AJAX request. But instead of replacing the entire body, it tries to find a matching Turbo frame in the response that it gets from the server and replace just the frame. And it does that by checking the DOM ID of the element. So that's Turbo frames. There's a lot to talk about Turbo frames, but I guess it's time for Turbo streams, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
this would be a very long podcast.
Yeah. With Turbo Drive, you replace the entire page. With Turbo Frames, you replace only one portion of the page.
Yep.
But there are times where you need to update multiple sections of the page upon a user trigger action or something. Let's say the user is creating a comment in a post or something.
Mm-hmm.
You would want to append the new comments to the comments list. You would want to reset the form. Maybe there's a counter. Maybe there's a flash message that you want the user to see. That's hard to do with just Turbo frames. And you also don't want to replace the entire body. So for those situations where you need to update multiple parts of the page, you can use Turbo streams. A lot of folks seem to think that you need WebSockets to use Turbo streams, and that's not true.
Okay.
You don't need that. You can return Turbo streams from your controller to the front end directly as a response of a request, and Turbo understands that you're returning Turbo streams and performs its actions, because each Turbo stream there are 7 actions that you can do with Turbo streams. You can append to something, prepend, update, replace, delete, or remove, I should say. And then you can also insert before, insert after things in the page.
Can I just ask, just to make sure I'm clear? So Turbo, in general, what it does, it hijacks the links and the forms and sends an AJAX request instead. And then in return, it doesn't receive JSON like we would expect with an API. Yeah. It receives HTML back. So this is what makes it so fast, because all the rendering happens on the server, not on the client side. Do I understand it correctly?
Yeah, that's also the main idea of Hotwire. Hotwire is an acronym, or it's a word that means HTML over the wire. That's Hotwire. So it's like they send HTML back and forth. There's no JSON serialization or anything like that.
Okay.
So you spot on there. So you can return Turbo streams from a request and update multiple parts of the page. And this is where it gets interesting. So you can use WebSockets or any other broadcasting mechanism that you want. For instance, if there are 2 users visiting the same page, one of them interacts with the page, you can actually get the same Turbo stream that you're sending to this user that is interacting with the page, and you can broadcast that HTML to all users that are visiting this page with WebSockets or Server-sent events or anything else. So the idea is you send the same HTML, or the HTML that you want to send, I should say. So yeah, that's why you use WebSockets, but it's not a requirement.
Okay.
And we also have Turbo Native, which is something very interesting. I don't think Turbo Native is talked that much, and it's the thing that actually got my attention in the first place. On the web, Turbo will hijack links and form submissions and do this other things that we talked about. But on the mobile side, what you have is a web view mainly. So you have a shell application written in Kotlin or in Swift, and inside that application, the most basic example is a web view, right? So the user will see a responsive version of your web application on their mobile applications. It would be weird, not weird, but it wasn't going to be that good if we just replace the body in the same web view, because that's not how mobile navigation works.
Yeah.
So Turbo Native does something else. It like Turbo Drive will listen for links and form submissions, and it will instruct Turbo Native that, hey, there's a navigation going on. So Turbo Native will intercept that and will do a mobile navigation. So it's like you'll see a new screen popping and stacking up on top of that screen, like as a real native screen, even though it's probably going to open a new web view. Or you can actually do some more advanced stuff. So with Turbo Native, you can configure certain URLs from your screen, from your application, to actually open real native screens instead of web views. So this is the part that actually it's super interesting to me. Like, you can increase the fidelity of your application for a specific mobile client, and you can do that per URL.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's the thing that got my attention in the first place. So let's say like the first page of your application is a home application where you see the most recent activity or something.
Mm-hmm.
You probably want a native screen on the mobile client, because that's the first screen that the user sees,
right?
And you want that to be fast. So that one you usually implement in fully native.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
You mentioned that you found Turbo Native interesting. So when you were building Turbo Laravel, can you think of an interesting problem that you come up with, like something that made you like, how am I going to solve that?
Yeah. Okay. It's something that was actually, I spotted it when I was exploring Turbo Native. So it has to do with the way that Laravel handles form validations.
Mm-hmm.
Usually a Laravel application, you can type hint a form request in the controller action. This is getting too technical.
No. This is totally fine. Go for it. It's totally fine.
Yeah. So you can type hint a form request in a controller action. And in that form request, you have validation rules.
Yeah.
If any of those rules fail, Laravel throws an exception, right? So it's like before it actually enters the action, it throws an exception and redirects the user back to where the request came from. But because of Turbo frames, we can inject forms in pages where the form doesn't exist. Maybe it's easier to picture if we are visualizing the same page. So let's say you have a post page and you have a add comment link at the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
You click on it, the form shows up.
Yeah.
That form, it's now showing in the post show page. It's not showing the post ID /comments/create, which is where the form lives.
Okay.
So if the user submits an invalid form, and when we get to the Laravel validation handling and Laravel redirects back, it redirects back to the post show page.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the form.
Oh.
So it's like users would see the form disappearing.
Yeah.
That's the idea, which is not a great
user experience, I have to say, if the form disappears on you.
Yeah, you probably don't want that.
No.
And it was actually very tricky to work around this problem because, as I said, like this happens way before it enters the controller action, which is where you would have more control over where you redirect the users to. So what I ended up doing was, we have a middleware that we prepend to your application.
Yeah.
And we catch validation exceptions inside the application, and we try to figure out where the form for this request lives from. Yeah. And we do that because Laravel has this naming convention for resources. So if you have a, comments.store route, like if the request was to this comments.store route, the form probably renders in a comments.create route.
Yeah.
So
as
what
long
we
as
do
you
is
stick to the naming conventions. Yeah.
Exactly. And we check for that. So if there is this route, and we do all those checks, and that only happens if you are actually using the convention. So if that's the case, then we dispatch another request internally. So it's like the user sends one request that gets a validation exception thrown that goes back to the middleware, which checks for that, and we see that, the form actually lives in this page. Don't redirect back. We can dispatch another request back to the application internally, and then we return whatever the form, the HTML, and returns from that action. So
fascinating. Wow. I mean, how did you... how was it like a way of like a trial and error? How long did it take you to figure it out? Like, were there different approaches you tried?
No, I actually had some troubles with it because I wasn't aware that I needed to, like, there is a certain place in the middleware stack that you have to put your middleware if you want to do something like that. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that. So I was having like issues because my cookies were being encrypted, and I needed to encrypt the cookies again and send it to the application, and I was lost. But then Taylor reached out, and he pretty much gave me the code I wanted to write. So it was fun.
That's the magic of the Laravel community. We help each other. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Tony, is there something that you'd love to add to Turbo Laravel that you haven't had time to build yet, or maybe something you want to fix from something that you've implemented already? Is there sort of something that you just wish you could get to?
Nothing in particular, I think, but because the thing is, I try to keep this library in pair with the Rails gem.
Yeah.
So I try to keep them as close as I can to feature parity and all that. But I also want, like, there are some patterns and stuff that only exist or that are common in the Laravel world that they are not so common in the Rails world. And I wanted to support that. So we have that in the package already. There is a different way to return turbo streams from the controllers because this pattern, this way of building things in the Laravel community is more common. So we actually have that. One area that I would like to explore more is in the native side, but that doesn't actually have much to do with the Turbo Laravel package.
Sure.
It's more like I need to spend some time working with native applications using Turbo Laravel and see which problems are happening there.
Do you find it challenging at all to sort of like, because you've got, as you said, Turbo Laravel you're trying to keep it basically up to date as much as possible with something that somebody else is doing and building. Has that been a challenge at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, I can see you all, because this is an auditory experience, you all can't see the look on Tony's face, but Tony was like, yeah.
At the beginning, I was on top of the issues on the Hotwire repository.
Yeah.
But then I spent some weeks away, and then when I got back, it's like I have 500 issues that I have to check.
No.
But they are not to my application, but they are to the Hotwire application, and I try to keep parity with stuff. So it's like, I guess I should read them.
So every time they make a fix, you have to make a fix. Oh, you're like a shadow team member at this point.
I'm trying to.
Are you the only one working on Turbo Laravel, or have you got anyone else to help you?
There are some folks sending contributions,
Okay.
But we don't actually have a team working on this or anything. It's pretty much me and other folks using the lib that wants to contribute to it.
And would you say that it's finished? Like currently you have it where you want it to be, the package, and you're just going to improve or like keep an eye on Hotwire and go with that. But for now, do you feel like Turbo Laravel is finished?
It is finished, but there are some areas that I want to improve on, which is basically on the huge job that we send when we broadcast things, as I mentioned earlier, the job is actually getting larger than I wanted it to be because we have to serialize. There's a whole issue there. We have to serialize. Like basically, you tell the huge job to when you're broadcasting a turbo stream, you say render this view with this data, and you're sending that to the backend. But the data is an array, and it can be many different things. So depending on what you send as the data, your job message, like the background job message, can get actually really large because that's going to be serialized and sent to the queue, which depending on the queue driver that you're working on, like if you're using SQS or something, there is actually a limit to the size of the message.
Mm-hmm.
So folks might face some issues there, but I still haven't found an efficient way to serialize these jobs yet. There are some things that I wanted to explore, but I'm still digesting this problem.
Before we go.
Yeah.
I mean, this seems to be like a very typical cheesy question, but has anyone ever asked you, how does Hotwire compare to Livewire?
Yeah, actually, I got some questions on Twitter. And, and the YouTube videos that I put as well. Honestly, I don't have a good answer for it, but I can try to come up with one.
Yeah, go on.
I would say the problem that both of these libraries are trying to solve is similar. So the idea is that you write reactive applications only writing server side code. So you don't actually write front-end code that much, even though you're actually doing both of them, but it's not that much. It's like minimal JavaScript. That's the idea.
Mm-hmm.
But the way they do this is different. Livewire is more on the component side of things, and Hotwire is more on the REST and resources side of things. So it's actually a bit challenging to explain, but I think, for instance, in Livewire, you tend to think more in terms of stateful components, even though I know that Livewire is actually stateless. There's no stateful process running in the back end or anything like that. It's like you send state back and forth between the client and the server. You have to think, in Livewire, you have to think in terms of stateful components. And in Hotwire, we embrace the stateless approach of building web applications, which might make sense to some folks or not. I don't know. What's interesting about this is that you can actually use both of them in the same application, and they work just fine. You don't have to choose one or the other.
So it's not one or the other. It's just two packages that kind of work on the same principle, I would think. But
so the whole idea of Hotwire is like you progressive enhance your application towards more interactivity, more dynamicness on the client side. And you could have Livewire, and to achieve that, you use the tools that we talked so far, like Turbo Drive, Turbo Frames, Turbo Streams, and then you also can use Stimulus when you actually need to write some client-side code. What you could do there is have Livewire as an option to write some of the reactive code as well. So you don't actually need Stimulus until you need something more on the client side of things. So you could have Livewire as an option there as well. And Alpine, of course. Alpine also works with this thing. So at that time, it gets a lot of things on the same app, which might be confusing to some folks. So that's why I've been avoiding this discussion.
I'm sorry, but when you said
that's
that,
fine.
People ask you that, so I said, well, people want to know, so let's ask and let's see.
Yeah.
Okay, Tony, one last question and then we'll let you go. Is there one thing that you wish we would have asked you about Turbo Laravel? Is there something that we didn't get a chance to talk about today?
No, I think we actually covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, I learned a ton. I don't know about Susanna. I mean,
definitely.
I knew a little bit going in, but Tony, this has been super interesting, super fascinating to learn more. And so you gave us your Twitter handle. what's the? I mean, where can people find the actual repo or website for Turbo Laravel?
It's under my GitHub profile. It's GitHub/TonySM /Turbo Laravel. But you can also just Google Turbo Laravel, and that will get you to the repository.
All right. Well, Tony, this has been great. Thank you so much. Susanna, do you have anything else you want to say before we go?
No, I think we've covered, like Tony said, we've covered a lot of ground, and I found it really interesting. And yeah, I can't wait to give it a go.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Tony. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tony.